Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Personnel Board's meeting of December 7th, 2022. I'm going to call the meeting to order. We have a quorum, so we do not have to go through the protocol, I guess. We do have a fifth member, Joe Emmerich, who is in Pennsylvania, not able to join us even on Zoom tonight, but Joe is officially our fifth member, and Joe will be with us next week. So we welcome Joe for sure, and certainly allow us, I think, to do many more things on the personnel board than we've ever done. We're going to go over the minutes of the November 22nd, 2022. It's in your packet. Do we have any comments, suggestions, modifications, edits to these minutes?
I have a question on the first page about 3/4 down. It says bill, but it is certainly good to get it started and live up to the 12/6 deadline. Is that supposed to be 16? The warrant article? It's just a clarifying. Oh, it is.
Entertain a motion to approve the minutes of November 22nd. Second. All those in favor? Aye. Nancy?
Aye.
Bill? Aye. Okay. Thank you, Liz, for another excellent job with these minutes.
I just want, I'll put in the records that I do understand that the compliments are due to fear that I might not. I will allay those fears and tell you that I'm very happy to do the minutes. Okay.
Realize that those six.
Excuse me. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, the sound quality is very poor. I don't know, perhaps it's just my me, but I'm seeing if anybody else on the Zoom is having trouble. It's very hard to hear you and it's patching out.
We weren't actually turning on our mics. I think that might have been the problem. Can you hear me now? This is Liz Cobb speaking.
I can. I don't think it's about the mics because it goes through the one device. The mics aren't what are being used for this. So Kelly, that one that's on the table.
Actually,
That's the right one. Do you want to test? Just say test in that. So
hello. Test 1, 2, 3. Did you hear that, Amy?
Yeah, I heard it. It's okay. We'll see. It was patching and it was a little difficult, but let's keep going and I'll let you know. And I just ask anybody else on the Zoom if they're having trouble, please let us know.
Okay, good point. Good point. We're going to move to item number 3 on the agenda, which is the follow-up from our meeting with the select board that took place on Monday evening. It was, from my vantage point, it was a great opportunity for us to meet and speak in front of the select board. I think it gave appropriate congratulatory comments to the Personnel Study Task Force that was obviously charged with a very, not an easy task, but they certainly came through in flying colors. And I think that appreciation was expressed by the select board. And that was good to be able to have that, I think, for the minutes and for the record. So I think what we're going to need to do here is to talk a little bit about, as the minutes or as the agenda says, next steps. But maybe before next steps, any other sort of comments from personnel board members about the Monday evening meeting? You don't have to. I mean,
No, I don't have any. I thought you had a lot of time. I thought you had a lot of time and you presented well. I thought the format that you showed was great. So I'm not sure if I came away as I did the reporting of the exact things that they were looking for. They knew where we were at and how much little time we had. And we're impressed of the fact that we were probably going to get something done this year. But I don't know if there was, I don't know if I had like 1, 2, 3 of what they wanted us to go for.
Kate or Liz, any input or comments?
No, I mean, I agree. I think, I mean, I thought it was a really great discussion. I think, the fact that they gave us that much time to talk and, I think, the fact that they were sort of surprised that we were going to have anything, to move forward with, and not pleasantly surprised, I think I should say, was pretty encouraging. I didn't really have anything substantive.
I think you make a really good point. I mean, I should have said this at the outset, but I mean, the personnel board members, those of us in this room and those supporting us from the town, really, I think, did a very, very good job to pull this all together in a short period of time. I think the formatting and the actual document was superb. And yes, there's clearly work to be done, but I give each of you a pat on the back, maybe a free ticket to get out of jail, but this really was a good effort. And in some ways, we set the bar high, and it will be a good challenge for us to be able to continue to produce.
I did think you and Liz did an excellent job that morning that you went and put everything together, redid it, the high, the low communication, all the different, I thought that was a really excellent way of showing it.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just finishing Nancy's sentence. So a couple of things. I thought we did the best that we could at that time to lay out explicit statements of action. And I thought that the areas of focus were helpful to that. And after the meeting, I had two, maybe three, select board members indicate to me that they felt that the format was very helpful and that they had clarity over where we would go. So that's positive. When I presented on the meat of the document, I tried to highlight things that were an integrated ask, like, you know, monthly report from HR and more information from the town manager on a strategy around those job descriptions that we are asked to approve. We did get agreements, nods. I'm not sure how it'll show up in their minutes, but there wasn't any pushback in terms of the requests that we had.
Mhm.
And in fact, Matt Johnston also said, oh, more interaction with select board, let's get you on the agenda in March. So I thought that was very positive in terms of their reception of what we were working on. I think that as would normally be the case at this time of year, that their real interest and focus is articles for the warrant for now. And that work is probably how we can kind of, you know, put our high priority issues in a sort of order of what we can get done. Some of them, as indicated in the report, are done, like putting up our minutes and keeping up materials longer. That's an immediate fix, right? So I felt it was a very good start. But I also was thinking, okay, so we have to use that document as our living document and really, you know, use it to say, did we do it yet? Have we, you know, and really check maybe in each meeting to understand, are we making progress? So, and obviously for the reason that we're meeting weekly now is around the articles for the warrant. So fully embrace that has to be top priority. I didn't, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of time that they gave us, absolutely true. I just didn't, I wasn't clear that it was fully embraced, that how we need to be integrated more in the town governance. And that is something I think we can follow up going forward. Yeah.
I think that's a good observation. Very, very good
And the
observation.
other thing too is they were seeing that for the first time, right?
Well, they had it in their packet over the weekend to read.
Right.
So that was encouraging,
Yeah.
right?
But I think that there was an awful lot of meat in that whole thing, and I think that, you know, you really had to go through it several times and keep on looking at it, so I don't know. You know, I think there was a lot for them to put together, and so I think that's probably why you didn't maybe hear more, particularly from Carrie, except for.
Well, I was just, one of the things I was thinking is that, as you were talking, is that maybe part of why they haven't, I mean, I do think that they were certainly receptive to what we had put forward, but I don't think we're clear on what the role of the personnel board is moving forward. And so they are still trying to, once
don't know
we
either.
understand it or have a concept or proposal, then maybe they can sort of, you know, wrap around it, so,
Right.
and be in support, so.
Well, it seems to me that in terms, and I'll obviously ask for your comment, that we could spend some time this evening talking about next steps. But I'm of the mind that the most important thing is we need to be tackling the warrant article. And not that we're not understanding that having a follow-up for what we did with the select board and taking our document and perhaps identifying what the priorities are, you know, really priorities of terms of what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, so forth. Is that gets deferred to probably after we finish the warrant article discussion. And I think that also is, in my view, certainly relevant to the personnel board charge. Now, the personnel board charge is very important, but I think what's more important are the warrant articles. We have to get that done. So if it's okay with the personnel board, I'd like to have a shift to discussion on the warrant article preparation. And this will be certainly input and comments from both Kelly and Amy to help guide us through. My sense is, this is my sense, that we're not going to be successful in having a good warrant article if we're trying to include everything in the bylaw changes. We're just not going to be successful. I think I'd be disappointed. I think we'd all be disappointed if the effort was less than 100%. So what's really important, and I made this comment at our last meeting, is there were 21 different items that were mentioned. And we needed to, I suggest, identify the top 7. And those top 7 are the ones that we actually spend time, we have discussions. And when those 7 get done, we then go to the next 7.
And so this is particular to the bylaw changes, is that correct?
Right. I mean, am I correct that there were 21?
Yes.
Okay. So we have an inventory, we have a laundry list here for us to consider. But I think we need input from Amy and Kelly and the town management as in terms of, you know, some of these, maybe we have 7 already done. Well, if there's 7 that are already finished and almost finished, then let's have those be our 7 and let's move on.
I do want to.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Amy, Kelly, I do, before we move on to this work, because I agree we should, and that's the focus. But I do want, and I'll capture in a minute, to register how disappointed I was that Amy and Kelly, you shared a document with the select board, used time that was for the personnel board and didn't share that in advance with us. I thought we were a team. I didn't understand that you would be putting in something that was overlapping. I went over it in great detail now, and there were quite a few overlaps with the materials that we've been working on as a team together. But they were conveyed differently than the personnel board. And I just want to register how disappointed I was that you did that without making us aware when we were presenting. Because I thought they were, critiquing us, and they weren't, but I didn't know that there was other things on the table.
Sure. Thank you. I can understand that, Liz. And, I apologize that that's how it came about. I'd like to just share a couple things about that. One, right from the beginning, the select board had been looking for not only a report from the personnel board, but also from the HR. And so that wasn't something that, as I understood it, that Matt was looking for me or HR to use your time. It was looking to hear from HR separately, and that had been conveyed to us. I do know that, Bill was on that email. And then during the work putting together the wonderful matrix that I hope we did help contribute in terms of giving some ideas on how to do that, we were looking to support you in that. I think what that didn't fully go into, there wasn't a point where it was part of the HR department response to the things that we were being asked. And so Bill had, I believe, Billy, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you had asked me about that after that meeting and said, I realized that there's also a second component here. And so what I offered to do was to do a memo, because I think much of what you had in there was the same. And then I wanted to acknowledge what the things we have been focusing on are, so that we could report that, not meaning to be in conflict, and to gather the various goals that were already out there before that exercise, that were part of the select board's goals and town manager goals and HR goals from before all of this process, and put them out there, because I think that needs to be part of the continuing discussion. Certainly should have been in the packet sooner, and there are a wide variety of reasons for that. And if you haven't picked up on it, I'm pretty sick, but I'm trying to keep up with you all. We are in the midst of a very intensive time with the class and comp study. I've been trying to support your weekly meetings, and I'm not trying to make excuses at all, but I am, I'm trying to keep up and get you the materials that you need as quickly as possible. I had intended that to be a document that would be, I thought it was, given that I couldn't get in the packet, I wanted to present it at the meeting, and there wasn't a lot of time at that point. And I guess there was a misunderstanding of whether it was passed out to the participants. So a variety of factors, but I understand that didn't go well. And I apologize to you and the select board for that. I also have materials tonight that I think are responsive to what Bill is asking, that again, I'm just getting to you because I've been continuing to work on all of this stuff as quickly as I can, that I can walk through with you. I understand that you won't have had an opportunity to review it first. I'm not asking for any action tonight, but I think it might guide the discussion, and that I could present it.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Amy, for that. I think it highlights how important the communication is to having a good team effort. And it's sometimes there are glitches, and we've all experienced those. So I think the spirit is correct, that we're all trying to establish something which is a joint effort, and that's how I think we should just continue to move along that way. It's so noted in the minutes, but I think we don't need to really spend any more time on that point. So I'm back to the discussion of, or the points about, I said 7, but can we have some input from Kelly and Amy on, and it doesn't have to be 7, maybe it's 6 or maybe it's 20, I don't know, but where are you at with these? And I have to think you have even done informally prioritized where you spent your time, because I have to think you would only spend your time on those items, or spend your time first on those items that are most important.
Right.
So that's
right.
that's an assumption.
Right. Despite all the consistent number of hours and meetings, there are a lot of things that we just haven't been able to get to. So certainly we've been needing to make priorities and judgments along the way. I do have something that I'll both put up on the screen and that Kelly can pass out to you that is a narrowed down list of items, and I'm trying to get it to actually some language that you can consider to decide whether to move forward. So just let me get this up on the screen so that everybody can see it.
Pardon. May I just interrupt for a moment?
Mhm.
Would you mind if I offer some context for how we've just very quickly have gone through some of these items and how we've been working to categorize them together? Just, is that okay through the chair? So since coming on board about 9 months ago, we've been doing a number of things that will hopefully make this process, meaning your list of action items, go smooth, and to make our time together, most efficient. One of the things that we did in terms of getting prepared for this moment is, as soon as we saw the recommendations of the Personal Study Task Force, what we did together is come up down to a list, and it started with 7 items. So 7 being the magic number. The way I review the information, we basically outlined all parts of the bylaw and looked at the recommendations of the study task force and came up with 7 things that I felt that there was a common point of agreement on with respect to language. Now, some of this is minor language housekeeping. Some of it is larger and opens the door for more discussion about the role of personnel board, the role of town meeting. So I came up with a list of 7 things, and I said to Amy, here's the best case scenario. Here are 7 things, and we can reduce this list. And so from that list, Amy looked and she said, well, we need to look at this not as 7 independent warrant articles, but as 7 potential amendments. And she said, there are other things, other parts that we need to look at. So we came up with a list of the 21 items. Some of those are placeholders. We want to make sure that with our consultation with you, that we can decide either this is important or non-important or right. So that's where the list of the 21 things came from. Our hope is that we will narrow down that list based on our discussions with you and our discussions as well with the town manager on some of these items. So that's the framework to which we got to these 21 items that were in your packet. I just wanted to explain how we got there to that point. Thank you, Amy.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So I've got a cover sheet here and I just want to go through it. So this packet are, things that we recommend that you consider for bylaw amendments. I think the intent here is to identify changes that, without making substantial change that hasn't been fully vetted, we realize, there's only weeks to go. We're not trying to do things that people can't see, but trying to do things that are helpful. So without doing that, we want to make sure we pave the path for success in implementing the new class and comp plan. So that's one thing. If there are some things that would help with implementing that and clarifying or match it, we want to make sure we take care of that, because that we anticipate will go into effect for July 1. Also, if there are places that we can allow for enhancement of the non-wage administration, adding clarity and efficiency, that sort of things, we thought we'd give to you the opportunity to think about whether this is the time to make those sort of changes, not looking to change benefits, that sort of thing, but perhaps the way it's structured. So we just want to think about those things. And we recognize that, again, if something isn't coming together, this isn't the right time to do it. So the purpose of this conversation is to just outline options, identify your priorities, and then to determine the next steps for how to go about refining any proposed amendments. So attached, you're going to see that I've got excerpts from the personnel bylaw to illustrate areas where language amendments might be helpful. And while there's ideas there, that language definitely needs consideration and refinement if you want to proceed. We just need to make sure it works and get some more input. There were a number of things on the list of 21 that aren't recommended at this point. That just, you know, if you see something that you thought was important, or if you found something in the task force report that you think is important, certainly we should be talking about that. But here are things that we thought that this might not be the right time for a variety of reasons. So the purpose in the application of bylaw, I do think there are some ways that could be perhaps clarified, but that goes into, again, the whole greater purpose of the bylaw and the rules of the boards and all of that. So that's a greater discussion. In training status has come up, but again, more discussion would be needed. I don't think we can make a change this quickly. There's been a request from some types of employees for getting acting pay for single days. Well, that is important. It will be difficult to define in a bylaw, and we do think there are other methods of addressing that we could talk with you about through policy. So again, not thinking that it needs to affect this year's warrant. Longevity pay, I think everybody agrees that needs an update. We'd love to be doing it this year, but it seems that there's a lot to discuss about that and how to implement it and make sure that it works with the new compensation plan. So putting that out for another year might be the best thing to do. Workers' compensation, I note that because in the task force report, they identified that there was an inconsistency with law. I think they thought that it wasn't legal to supplement workers' comp with vacation or other types of paid leave, which is what the purpose of that bylaw is. I have not been able to find anything that says that is not legal. I know it is a common practice. There was a recent ruling related to the retirement system that says that when towns supplement, it can't be part of regular compensation for the purposes of retirement, but that's not what this bylaw is about. So at the moment, I don't recommend any change. I think that's a great benefit for employees, and I'm not aware of it being unlawful. But of course, if we find something more on that could change. Holidays was on that list. There's some questions about continuing to add more flexibility or floating holidays. We have done some things with policies to allow for some flexibility for employees. And so I think that makes sense for this year. And then we could continue to look at that as a greater item. Personal leave, no need for change at this time was identified. An interruption of employment, no need identified at this time. There's some questions there about it gives service credit to people that leave and then come back. And the question that came up was, well, is there a limitation on that? If somebody worked for the town 20 years ago and comes back, do they get to come back in with all the same service credit? So it's a discussion to have. And what does it take to identify those records and all of that? But not a priority. So those are things that didn't make it to the list. And certainly if you felt otherwise, we could bring them on.
Amy, one question that I have, and certainly a theme throughout the Personnel Task Force's report, discussions and so forth, is a comment that the expectation on the part of employees of, showing improvement, showing advancement, that expectation was something that was important to keep in mind. In this list, in that first page, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 different items. Which of those 8 items is really not that they're all not important for employees, but again, trying to determine what, if any of these are perhaps more important. Is there 1 or 2 of these particular items that stick out as, it's going to be a disappointment on the part of some employees that the personnel board is not addressing, or the town meeting isn't going to be addressing?
I would say perhaps the longevity. I mean, that's certainly been out there for a long time. There's questions about differences in, one is the amount of the longevity just seems so small. The other is that some of the union contracts, they've negotiated a different schedule. It's not that they earn more at 5 years and 10 years and all of that. It's that instead of some unions gave every other step away up until like 20 years into service and for a bigger amount. So it's so there are, the thing is, there are different opinions about what would make a good longevity program and what would be fair and how, and affordable. Another thing is how it gets paid out. Right now, it's paid, it's worked into hourly rates to make sure that it's included in the regular rate for under FLSA for overtime, but perhaps there's a different way to pay it that would feel more rewarding than getting something like 6 cents per hour in your pay. So Bill, I guess, there's I don't know how many people that impacts. It's something that's sort of always been there, like, well, this is a bit of a joke, but I don't think it's the highest priority. I think people are most interested in getting the class and comp plan addressed.
No, I don't disagree with that. And you've answered the question that the one item there is the longevity pay.
So I think it might be a good time to mention, so we have 2 draft warrant article pages in front of us also, not the package that you gave us this evening, but part of the package for today. It was clear from the discussion at the select board that we really need time for communication to employees that is legitimate before the warrant is closed. So I just want to flag that now, because I think we have to add that into whatever we're looking at to do. And that might give us some more feedback on what, the question, Bill, that you've just asked. And I felt I put that on both of those: ratified personnel board classification actions and also the class and comp plan for regular status and position. So both of those, I think we do need to incorporate and start to advertise to employees that will need a quick turnaround on their communication back to us on that.
Right.
And I think that's your key. What you said is key. And certainly it does support the position or argument that we need to focus on
Right.
just a sufficient number, but we don't want to overtax ourselves or overburden ourselves. And I think clearly the longevity pay, even though it has some real interest within the town, that there's a lot of data collection and a lot of analysis. I mean, it's just a lot more than having a dartboard and throwing a dart. So I can see why that particular one really should not be. We shouldn't be addressing that because we're not going to be able to have enough time to do a good enough job. Okay, so.
Can I ask that? I'm sorry, Bill, are you saying not to do the class and comp plan this year?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm talking about the longevity pay.
I see. I'm sorry. Thank you. I couldn't
Just
hear.
that one item. No, the comp classification has to be done, so.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
so Amy, I think you can continue with your discussion about the document. We're,
Sure.
I guess, turning the page. We're at definitions.
Yeah. Okay. So it just again at the very top, I noted the that we would like to go through and make the gender neutral language substitutions. There's the pronouns, there's the fact that it's refers to the board, the selectmen, that sort of thing. So we would like to incorporate that into this in the easiest way possible. I think that's important to show a respectful workplace and is consistent with the DEI initiatives. So then in the definitions, it seemed like some of the things that have come up, perhaps in the task force discussion and for employees, related to some misunderstandings or definitions. That's certainly not all of it, but about things like what is a reclassification, what is a position change, what is a promotion, and what are the differences, and there's some different pay provisions related to those things in the bylaw. So we were really thinking about that and seeing if there was anything we could do this year that would help with that. While we do think that a more significant look at the bylaw would be important. So some things to consider would be looking at the classification plan. It said currently that it's a list of all approved position classification titles and summary job descriptions for each classification. And job descriptions, they aren't exactly the classification plan. I mean, obviously they are as long as it says here, but that's not a typical way of looking at it as I've understood it. And I did check in with Joellen from GovHR and asked her if she considered those to be the classification plan. And she would consider those to be a tool that is used when classifying positions, but it's not the classification plan itself. So might be helpful to address that here. That doesn't mean don't have job descriptions. I want to be clear. There still would be a section in the bylaw for job description. So it's just making sure that things are in the right place. Compensation plan, it refers to there being a minimum, maximum, and an intermediate, which we have had, but not knowing for sure what the classification plan might look like yet. Listing an intermediate doesn't always work with some plans, depending if you're using steps or if you have a range and then a like another merit range on top of it. There are some different ways to structure it. I don't know all of what Joellen has in mind yet, but it seemed to me that we'd want to set this up the right way by not talking about an intermediate that really isn't necessary. Also for some clarification on something related to the task force said that there are some other types of pays beyond that, and there are, and so it would be good to clarify that plan is the base wage, and then there are other types of pays that are added through section 10 of the bylaw. So I thought it might help to define the classification system. So I've got a draft definition here, which is an established method of evaluating and grouping positions using a standardized scale that considers factors such as the level of and impact of work, required qualifications, and working conditions. And I say that because I think using the term classification system could be helpful sometimes. So then the two most important: promotion. Currently, it says the movement of an employee from one position into another position, which is in a classification with a higher maximum salary. Well, that works when you've got, like in union contracts, where you could think of it as the traditional structure. Everybody knows that a sergeant's paid more than an officer, and chief is paid more. We've got so many positions in our plan and in a number of different fields that in of itself, just the salary range being higher, does not equate to a promotion. So for example, if I decide I want to switch and go over and be a line worker, and the line worker salary range is higher, that doesn't mean I'm being promoted. So the salary range in of itself is not an indication of, let's call it, rank, that sort of thing. So there are some other factors. In my first stab at it was to say that it's the same field of work, has greater responsibility and is in a classification of a higher range. And then reclassification. Currently, it just says it's a movement from one classification to another classification. But classification is defined as a title. And so we also have times where, let's say the equipment operator, we decide that the equipment operator should move from grade 3 to grade 4. We've considered that a reclassification, even though the title has stayed the same. So, I think we need to look at that because that's created some confusion. The difference between an upgrade within a system, within the salary compensation plan, versus classification that is the point factor system and determines weight and which salary band it's in. So, whether we can tackle all of this, I don't know, but these are the things that I was observing that may be creating some of the confusion. So that,
right,
and I was gonna say, I'll pause there. It is integrated into some of the next pieces, but yeah, go ahead.
why don't opportunity for personnel board to provide any feedback at this point? I mean, obviously, we're just talking about definitions, but we're also talking about process and talking about next steps. So any thoughts?
My thought was that anything that makes them clearer, particularly to the employee, that defines them better than what they were, is important. I think the classification and compensation, making sure that they understand exactly what each one refers to. I don't have anything specific. I'm just looking at the whole thing as.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I agree with all of the recommendations. I think they do make them clearer, especially removing job descriptions from a classification plan. I agree. I've not really seen that wrapped into a definition for a plan in that way. And I think it kind of muddies the definition and what a plan actually is.
5, 7,
Yeah, I don't really,
9,
I guess
1, 6.
I got it.
that was weird. Okay, yeah, I don't think I have anything else to say. I mean, I think they do make them clearer, so.
So I have a question with this new definition
Mhm.
classification system. And, you know, in the back of my mind is, the adjudication, that we went through recently with the 5 employees. And it seems to me that the way it's stated here, an established method of evaluating and grouping positions, then that established method would have to be clarified.
Mm.
And without that, then the definition itself, I think, doesn't add anything to clarity of, for the employees, right? Because what we were faced with was continued not clarity for those employees, right? So stating it here, I don't see that this is going to get us further along that path.
So that matter that came up was about what the salary range should be. It's the compensation plan, which is different than the classification. So classification is,
But Amy, there's still a method, and if we don't clarify what the method is, then it's not established, right?
sure, I
So
understand. And so
whether
the-
it's a different issue or not isn't what I'm, you know, I'm not, I think we're gonna concentrate on the fact that a method is something that has to be clarified. It says established method, and we don't have that in the definition. So understanding the issue was on a different point, but why I brought that up is that what we're all working toward is to ensure that employees feel confident and understood, and they have clarity, as Nancy described the points. I don't see that putting established method down without clarifying what that method is gonna bring clarity.
Okay, and just so you know, what I consider the established method would be the classification system that we've just purchased from GovHR, and previously we've had one. It's a point rating factor. It's a standard thing that scores the positions. And so, you know, we have.
Right, so
one.
maybe that needs to be in the definition. If we're gonna have classification system and an established method, then we have to refer to that method. Because otherwise it's not clear, so.
I mean, I think it's really a case of just adding a clarifying sentence or two after what is currently there, after working conditions, and that would be in my mind the clearest way of doing it, because you've got an established method, and then you can articulate, you can describe what that method is in this definition.
So, I mean, I agree. I think having some clarity there is useful. I'm just concerned about making it too specific. If we say this is the GovHR system that we're purchasing, or whatever system, 5-10 years from now, we might not be using that system, and we're in the same place of having to redo the bylaw. So I just.
Well, there's a statement in the bylaw that every 1 to 3 or within 3
Right,
years, we should be updating. So we
No,
could
okay,
also
but-
say that in the definition, if we have to have a classification system definition in the bylaw. Right?
Sure, I just think it should be vague enough that it's not pointing to a specific method, that the method can change as needed.
All right, then
That's what I
then we can't call it an established method. Because established means concrete, clear, understood by all, right?
Right.
And it's not, is what you're pointing out.
Well, I mean, I think it is. I think,
Fungible.
right, well, it needs to be able to be flexible and change as the market changes, or maybe I'm misunderstanding the classification
Okay,
methods,
Then that
but-
could be stated, right? But to say it's an established method means
Okay.
something more concrete
Yeah.
than what we're actually talking about now, in my view.
We consider looking at other options for definitions. I know there's probably some good examples out there. This is probably the first stab at that, but
Yeah,
I completely hear you about established method. Maybe we could add that to our to-do list to get some definitions, to find the right one, if we're going to go through the effort of adding a new definition to the bylaw, which, by the way, in 1951, I was looking at the original that didn't have a list of definitions, so shows you how complex it's gotten over time. But I can look up for some samples for our next meeting if that's helpful.
Well, I think it may be. Definitions are always tricky, because unless you're really precise, you leave yourself open for a lot of questions and comments. At the same time, if you're too specific, as Kate, you were mentioning, then you dig another hole, because then if things change. So I don't at all purport to have the happy medium here. But I think it deserves, and I think the point that Liz has made, about the wording, it may simply be wordsmithing that. It may be coming up with some other words that are perhaps more appropriate, or my problem, I guess, with definitions is that we're sitting here, and it will be really important to have some employee feedback, because what we think is clear or not clear, or what we think helps to further the understanding, it may not be exactly what employees feel. So we're sort of, obviously we're relying a lot on Kelly and Amy to represent that viewpoint. And certainly I believe they're taking that responsibility seriously. But the point that Liz made earlier, that we need to be able to have this employee meeting, whether or not anybody would likely comment or not, who knows? But if you don't have a meeting, then nobody can comment. So what are your thoughts in terms of are we sort of, we're all sort of digesting this tonight. So I think in my mind, it's important perhaps to give Amy and Kelly some feedback, but we're not agreeing to anything tonight. We're just trying to clarify what we believe still needs clarification. So I think we're all in concert with that particular approach.
Yeah, I also do, I understand what Liz is saying, but the classification system is an established method. It's just saying that an established method of doing this kind of work will come up with the class system. So I guess if you have to put something in about who would be doing that, I think that's what you're getting to with the HR Gov. But I think the definition is just telling us that the class system is an established method. So maybe it should be an established something or other of evaluating. It's telling us what really the class system is. So I guess what you're wanting to do is to put who's going to do it. But that to me doesn't really, I don't know how.
What I think we should do
Yeah,
is
let them take it over.
Kelly has already indicated a willingness to take a look and see if there is some other substitute language that would be more appropriate. And I think we can move on to section 5, which is 5.1, and there are a few changes here. So does that make sense, Amy, for you to move on to?
Yeah,
5.1?
I think the point is to leave this meeting knowing where you'd like us to spend more time, or where you think it's not worth it because there's too much more to do. So yes, I think that makes sense. So classification plan, in the definition of authority, it goes back to the job descriptions. And so really matching back to definition on the other side. It's a listing of all approved classification titles. We don't think the job descriptions themselves are the classification plan. And so we should, sorry. All right, so we're suggesting to strike that. So then the next paragraph, the Personnel Study Task Force noted that they thought that the town manager and personnel board could change job titles. And so, I think this really needs some more thought about how that works, in also coupling that with what needs to go to town meeting. Here's a first stab, but I don't know how it works, which is just to say that it's that the titles are approved by the town manager and personnel board and reported to town meeting, perhaps, but I'd need to talk to people to see what that would mean. Ultimately, the whole class and comp plan still goes to town meeting under this warrant, so I don't know if this is something that could be considered this year or not.
And who would you get that? Who would you ask, Amy?
I talk to legal counsel on that, or even the town clerk and or moderator about the whole thing about town meeting reports. It's not something that I've worked with before. I just remember that, well, yeah, I'd have to look at the, those experts to kind of figure out what an appropriate process would be.
So I think that's a good example of something for the next meeting, because we don't have actually a proposal other than what's here, and we're questioning that we don't have enough information to be able to have any more discussion, I think. So we've got the allocation of positions to classifications, 5.3, Amy?
Right. So right now, the current language talks about when a new position is established, the personnel board reviews the duties and qualifications and allocated to the position and the position to an appropriate classification, and similar wording when a position has changed. But it's not, so the classification of a position goes right back to that system, the scoring system. We've had different ones through the years, but we have a scoring weighted system that determines the grade level. And so that hasn't been something that the personnel board has been doing. That's something that staff has been doing. And then we bring forward a recommendation for the classification based on that analysis. And I always give you an overview for you to be sure that that has happened, and some of the factors that are related to the recommendation. So, yeah, this is a thought of, do we want to go ahead and try to reflect that here? And so again, this is a rough language, but whenever the town manager establishes a new position or authorizes a change in the scope of an existing position, the town manager or the manager's designee shall perform a job evaluation using the classification system and recommend the classification, which determines salary grade assignment, to the personnel board. Personnel board shall allocate the position to an appropriate classification. So I don't know if that is something that's important or whether it could be refined as needed. I'll note that the salary, the way the bylaw is structured, we're talking about the classification plan and compensation plan separately. Means that while there are some pieces of that are related, they weave together, and by separating it, that's not clear. I don't think we can solve that this year. But the only place when it talks about reclassification, it's not really talking about the salary grade piece, and that's why I put a reference there. Anyway, don't want to make it more complicated, but just something to note.
Okay. My read of this particular new paragraph is, it seems logical to me, and it seems that it's clear as to who has authority and responsibility, and it's clear to me as to what's the expected outcome. So I don't know if for my benefit, I think I don't have any question, I guess, with the rewording here. Now, there've been two paragraphs that have been eliminated. Well, I guess it deserves a little making certain that those two eliminated have been incorporated back into the new first paragraph. But those are my thoughts. Anyone else have any comment for Amy and Kelly?
I was just looking at the C-section, which is the section 10.4, which positions required. So I guess that's changed a bit too, so you'll be able to follow along. Seems like, you know, what was in red under 5.3 clarifies the whole bunch of wording that was in the next two, so it is much clearer. And then it looks like you've done something to 10.4 too, so.
I'll make a note on 10.4. I've heard different thoughts on whether to do that sort of cross-reference. On the one hand, maybe that helps guide people to the next section that's relevant. But on the other hand, sometimes what happens is that a section is updated. So 10.4 might get updated and nobody's paying attention to the other. Hopefully they'd do a search, but should there be a reference there? Is it necessary, or really would it be better to not have it there? And really, as we make our policy structure clearer and start putting these together of what's in a bylaw and what's in a policy, that maybe we can help to get those connections for people.
Amy, for my benefit, can you go back over? I'm not sure I totally am following you with what you just said about 10.4 and 5.3.
Okay, sure.
Can you make another pass?
Another attempt. Yep. So the current language in a 5.3 has a cross-reference to section 10.4. It says, see section 10.4 of this bylaw for information on how such a reclassification would impact an employee's pay. So, one question is it helpful to have that reference or not? And I guess I would also consider, is everything considered a reclassification when, well, I guess I think I'm complicated. So basically, is it helpful to have that reference there? Or does it mean that, later we might miss the fact that one section is being updated and there was a reference in the other that nobody caught? I do think some things like that could be addressed through policy and the way we lay out policies in the future by connecting the bylaw and the policies in a better way.
But we're not going to be able to tackle that particular task now.
No, I just am trying to lay the
future
path, the groundwork, so that when we do those sorts of changes, it's cleaner to do that.
Essentially, what we're recommending is that this is about the form, and typically in a bylaw, you don't usually see this kind of parens that cross-references another section. What we're suggesting, and this was, and I think it was coming from the right place. The suggestion that was made is that there should be cross-references in the bylaw so that people might know what piece might be intersecting with another one. What we recommended as an alternative is that we keep the bylaw as simple as possible, and you use that cross-reference when you get to the policy document, which can be changed by a vote of the personnel board. So rather than bog down the bylaw with all this extra language, we would remove it, clarify the definition, and as we move forward through this process, we're going to look at our personnel policies, we're going to update those, and we're going to index those. That's where those connections are going to happen, not within the body of the bylaw, because the bylaw you can only change once a year by town meeting, versus the policy we can change with the town manager and the personnel board. So we're suggesting the same idea, just the opposite. We add that to the policy and take it out of the bylaw where it makes sense. And this is one of those places that makes sense.
Does everyone on the personnel board understand that particular point? Okay.
Yeah, makes sense.
All right, so
I do have a question on the last sentence in red under 5.3. So the personnel board, so there's another paragraph just to note that, but the personnel board shall allocate the position to an appropriate classification. So an appropriate classification is really, we're then to judge whether what is the recommendation put before us by the town manager or the manager's designee, whether we agree with it or not.
right,
Right, so what I want to understand is what information will we need to have in order to make that not just a rubber stamp? Right, we have to then, and so now the term as it's used here and as, you know, as we discussed in the definition, the classification system is significant, right? Because we have to be abreast of the current classification system so that we can understand that there is a reasonable use of the classification system to in the recommendation. Right? Otherwise, we're, you know, it's the same points that I made with the job descriptions, where we put forward in the last month, one job description was completely new role, but we don't know the strategy for the town on hiring. So I wasn't comfortable to agree to that new role. It's a similar thing,
Yeah.
right?
yes.
So where I'd like some recognition in the statement that shows what's available to us. And if it's somehow that we're using the term here, the classification system, and then that gets into the definitions or something, but we have to be able to be clear on what we'll have at our fingertips to do that.
I guess my question is, should that be in a bylaw or should that be in a policy? It seems like that should be in a policy, not a bylaw.
Yeah, that would be fine, but it needs to be done.
Yeah, no,
That's-
agreed, but
Yeah.
I just don't think it should be in the bylaw, just to simplify, to Kelly's point.
So meaning
Meaning,
you would delete,
no, I think, you know, keeping the personnel board shall allocate, you know, to the appropriate classification, that needs to be in there because that's a shall, that's what we are supposed to do, but I don't think, I'm not sure that the place to put, we need to make sure that HR provides the personnel board with the information needed in order to make that, I don't think
Okay,
that should be in a bylaw.
so maybe the verb has to change, shall stay, but allocate could change, right? Because
Right.
we have to recommend, or we have
Yeah,
to,
agreed.
you know,
Yeah.
make a judgment or something, but we are not allocating, it's already
No.
being advised what we should do,
Recommend,
You're approving.
we're approving a recommendation.
right? That's,
okay, yeah, no, that's a good point.
And perhaps something to think about, and that is what is the intended purpose of that and what role can the board play? So I would think certainly if an employee had a concern about it and wanted to talk about it, that's what you'd want to make sure that they had a forum for addressing that. So
whoa, wait a minute, wait a minute, that sounds a lot more than, because the allocation of positions to classifications is not getting that far, right? So we're not covering any questions that employees would have in this bylaw point. Right? It's only the personnel board is reacting to the classification system and what's recommended by the HR department or the town manager, manager's designee. And that's what we're doing.
right,
We're not-
what I'm trying to say is that an employee could come to the meeting and say, I don't agree with that recommendation or something like that, right?
And that's part of the policy and the procedures that will come from this bylaw.
Right.
How do we ensure that you can make a decision to vote for or against based on the system we're using? And in the policy, we will explain how that would happen. And the procedure would say, this is how we do it. So it's an extension of this. And also, I think Amy is just bringing forward the intent of the bylaw versus the next steps, which is policy and procedure. And it's been made very clear, we need to look at those policies. This will not just, we're not going to just change the bylaw and keep going. The policies are the big thing. We're just focusing on the bylaw because we're running out of time for the warrant. Does that help clarify that?
Yes.
But are we creating I guess, a scenario in which if we go ahead with this language in 5.3, but we haven't touched the policies and procedures, that there will be a period of time that will it be clear enough as to, I don't know how it could be clear enough as to what is the personnel board going to be expecting from the town as to supporting the recommendation. You see my point?
I do, but I think we're all going in the same direction. Remember, we've been doing this the same way. We know that we can do things to make it better, including some strategies for better communication. What we already have, we're able to do. All we're suggesting is that this language be more specific as to the role and responsibility of this board at this point in time. What I'm suggesting is that the bylaw changes the wording and we make it so that the bylaw is less confusing. And then our next step is to look at that policy. Does our policy allow you to make this decision to vote to approve an allocation that's been recommended to you by the town manager and the designee? And as a matter of policy, you're going to tell us, you know what, in order to do that, this is what we need. All right, so this is in alignment with the clarity, the clarification, and the simplification of the bylaw, so that to your point, what comes first, I think they can be in alignment. I really do. I do feel that they're in alignment, and we will make it that way. But we can't put a placeholder in the warrant until we make a decision about the wording that's in the bylaw.
Anyone else on the personnel board want to comment on where we've been so far, or should we just have Amy? Go ahead. Amy, why don't you proceed, please?
A section on, excuse me, on compensation. Again, similarly to the definitions, it refers to an intermediate, and I suggest that we take that out and also refer to base wage. And then on the second paragraph of 6.1, the task force pointed out again that this that the salary schedules are one part of wages, and so they recommended adding the phrase "except as provided for" in section 10 of this bylaw, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So we did include that in here.
Any comments about section 6.1? Seems like it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
So
it's pretty straightforward.
let's move on to 10.4. 10.4 reclassification.
So one of the things that was noted is that the wording related to reclassifications is confusing. It refers to step plans. It was recommended that wording come out. I know that it was left in with the thought that we need it in case there was a step plan, that there could be step plans at any point. But it is confusing. And also there's inconsistency in the language between a reclassification and a promotion and what that means for somebody's pay. In a simple system, it's easy to say, okay, if your position goes up 1 grade, you get 5%, 2 grades, 10% or something like that. We have so many positions of such a different nature within our scales that's a little bit difficult. And on top of that, with the Massachusetts equal pay law, we have to be very conscious of the pay rates of employees in the grade that the employee is going into. So let's say we say that they automatically get a 10% increase, but for whatever reason, that puts that person at a rate that's higher than somebody in a comparable position with all the other same factors, we'd have an issue. So what we do regularly, we've always done, but even more so and with a different way since that law went into effect, is we look at everybody's pay rates when we're putting these into effect. And so with all of that, we thought just perhaps using the same language for the reclass section as what's used for new appointments and for our promotions. And even you'll see later an acting pay might be helpful. And then, you know, again, that we can work within this, or if we want further definition, that could be incorporated into a policy. So this is just saying that the town manager determines the starting rate based on the manager's consideration of the individual's qualifications, available funds, market influences, internal equity, and any other relevant factors. Again, that's the language that I took from the appointments section.
So Amy, the reference to managers based on the manager's consideration that's the town manager.
Right. Yeah.
You may be,
The department manager.
Okay. So just repeat the word town. Yeah.
I would,
Town with
because
the intent.
Yeah.
I would say it is the manager of that department. if you go
Right.
down.
And the only other small discussion point would be is if we wanted to add those words or designate. What I'm thinking about is a larger system. You don't want to necessarily have to go to the town manager every time you've got a reclassification. So I don't know if that's essential, but that would be my recommendation, is that the manager could designate someone such as the HR director to approve those in, you know, that they would receive her authority to do that. So adding the words or designate might be something we want to consider for that final language.
isn't what I'm used to is if the CEO is going to be on vacation out of town, wherever, there was a document that was prepared by the CEO that indicated who was left, who had authority to act on behalf of the company. Is there a document that is relevant in a municipal setting?
During the town manager's vacation periods, there is someone that's assigned as an acting role.
But is there a piece of paper that states that?
Yes.
Email
Okay.
these days, Bill, but yes. Email, a written document, yeah, for that acting period, which is different than I think what Kelly was getting at is if the town manager wants to delegate that authority, not just during a vacation, but just general through policy or something like that.
Well, I think that's an interesting question. And the question really is that something which the personnel board would think is a good idea, would approve? I mean, it's one thing to have the town manager on vacation, but it's another thing to have the town manager present. And there's somebody else who's been delegated this responsibility. And we on the personnel board have no, I don't know, no insight, I guess, or no understanding of what this designee's experience is.
Well, do remember that you're making you're voting or approving the request for the reclassification. You're approving
Okay.
the decision to go into band 5.
Good point.
And so the question is, whenever somebody is reclassified or gets a promotion, are we going to have to come back to the personnel board or to the manager to say, hey, this person has 10 years experience and we don't want them to start at the beginning. We want them to be at the mid. To do that, it seems very cumbersome. And so that's why I suggested or designee might be the added 2 words that we put in there for practical, you know, just from a practical.
I would hope his designee would be pretty capable.
Absolutely.
You wouldn't have chosen him, wouldn't you?
I don't think these decisions will come up when the town manager's on vacation, though, right? They'll come up in a more, regular kind of process where I would assume if there is a designee, it has to be the manager, the oversight person for that department or that role, right? Working with HR perhaps, but
That's a good question. I actually, my assumption is it would be somebody at a senior level, just like when the town manager went on vacation recently, it was the fire chief,
Right.
if I'm right, the
Yeah,
fire chief
yeah,
and,
yeah.
and the senior administrative person. And they were the ones who actually made the decision in regards to the employee survey done by the task force to sort of say, no, you can't release that. I mean, they're the ones they were the safety valve.
I
So,
don't think it should be a department.
It would, sorry.
I mean, I would think it would be somebody that the town manager would have that would be, again, at a very high level, that would be able to look at the picture very differently than a department head. Or in conjunction, somehow, but,
Or designee tends to always suggest is that, you know, the buck stops here with the town manager. And if the manager is making a designee, they are doing so with the full intention that that person has the ability and qualifications to make that decision. It also allows us to be a little bit more flexible with respect to, you know, maybe at some point she will want a director to do it, but we don't need to get that specific. That's a management issue. What I was suggesting here is that we don't want to limit everything just to the town manager. We want to build in a little flexibility by saying or designate, which gives the town manager her authority to make that decision. That was just a small suggestion. We can certainly continue the discussion about that.
any other comments or
no,
about that?
I'm okay with designate. Knowing that it would be town manager, which would be designated.
So we'll go on to the next page, acting pay, Amy.
okay. So, in this section, again, it's the same theme. Somebody's going to be doing work in a different grade for a while. In this case, it would be for 3 or more consecutive work weeks or 15 or more consecutive work days, I should say. And they should get a rate of pay in the position that they're filling. And so there's kind of this confusing thing about how much is it and all of that. And what we're looking to simplify the language, make it consistent with those other sections that we just talked about, and make sure that it allows for consideration of various factors, particularly those that we'd have to consider under the Equal Pay Act.
So what prevents us from thinking about that this should be in a policy as opposed to having it be part of and incorporated in the bylaw?
Well, I actually think there's a overall question that needs to be answered over the next year of what should be in the bylaw, revisiting what's the purpose of the bylaw, how, you know, what topics should be there. So I approached it more from the what might help right now while we're waiting for that question to be answered.
Okay, I can see the value of that.
Move on or,
Any other, I think people were reading a little bit. We're
okay, sorry, I can't
ready to
see.
go on.
So this has to be, you have to do 15 days. Because I don't.
That you're reading
Somebody
my
does a
mind.
week in a job that's way working hard, they should be compensated.
You're reading my mind. Another one of the suggestions of the task force was to look at that number and see if that was reasonable or if there was, you know, and it came up with the town manager as well. She had suggested that we look at that number, we either reduce it or find some other mechanism. And one of the recommendations I think that Amy and I had talked about was, you know, maybe we could reduce it to 10 and then that allows us additional time to talk about the merits of what that number is and why. The reason I was thinking 10 was because if a manager goes out of town on vacation, Does that automatically mean that the next in charge is going to have to go through another change of status form to get paid for 2 weeks of covering for the manager? So rather than alleviate that, my guess is that the 15 days was for that purpose, that, you know, just because your boss is out sick for 1 day doesn't mean you're necessarily entitled to acting pay.
Right.
And so that was my understanding of probably why they came up with 15. I think 15 is a little lengthy. I was thinking 10 only because if somebody were to go out on vacation for 2 weeks, it basically establishes that this isn't something that you do just when you're covering for the boss. This is something that is a more longer term meaning more than 2 weeks. So my suggestion, if I had to move forward, would be to say, you know, maybe we should suggest changing 15 to 10, as simple as that. But then again, that could be one thing that you decide, you know what, we're not gonna, maybe you don't want to tackle that, but that would have been one of my suggestions. And it is something that came up alongside with the personnel task force report. So it might be one of those small little, you know, hanging fruit, or, you know, I don't know, what's the phrase,
Low hanging fruit.
low hanging fruit that we want to consider.
So I actually had a question about this. I agree. I'm not sure that if this belongs in a bylaw. I guess we can have a bigger discussion about that, but I was curious. This kind of, or this similar type of acting pay, I've seen a lot in collective bargaining agreements, and I'm wondering if there's, and I know Concord doesn't have a larger, you know, union workforce, but is this something that we could sort of use language or maybe mirror language so that it's you know, there's some similarity that might help with this?
Yeah.
I'm just asking. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
helpful.
No, I think it is. And I know that Carrie and I were talking about that as well. So, you know, different types of positions, it might need different considerations. So for example, when a manager, a director is out for a few days or a week, then, you know, they wouldn't normally need to, whoever they make acting doesn't usually get paid for that sort of thing. It's just part of their normal role. Whereas in a lot of the positions that are typically in some of those union contracts, or maybe police, fire, or might be in public works or line crew type situations, is when they have somebody working out of grade, and that's often what they call it more than acting, working out of grade for a day or more, then it does make sense. So we were trying to figure out how to make something that would apply the right way. And that was the only reason, you know, I did have a draft that said 10 days, and I didn't get to talk with the town manager further to figure out if we thought this was something that we could address this year or not. And it may be. So another possibility would be to shorten it significantly and put some more generic language that allows it to be adopted into policy. So sorry, don't know if I
Do now. Somebody has to work 15 days in that position to be compensated.
Yeah. So they don't get more while somebody's on vacation for 2 weeks, for example, or even 3. But once they get, if it's going to be more than that, then they would.
But even if it was a week and somebody had one heck of a week, to say the least, where they were called in 3 or 4 times and they were like, you know, really worked hard every day, had to come in early and stuff like that, would they get some compensation for that week?
No, not necessarily. No. And it wouldn't be an easy thing to implement, I'll say that, given our systems, but I think there are some things we could do for certain types of positions. Having it be a percent or a different rate of pay that has to be determined each time, that could be difficult. If it's some sort of a additional stipend, you know, it's another $1 an hour, or it's this or that might be easier. So that's where we thought it might need some more, just more evaluation. But so there are multiple pieces that relate to this discussion, and some of them more complicated than others. I would think we may be able to look at shortening that 15 days. I would like to hear from the town manager and departments on what impact that would or wouldn't have, but I think people would be interested in in doing that. Going lower than that may be difficult for this year without more study.
Is there anything that precludes the town? Well, let me start with again, in a public company that I've been obviously spent a lot of time with, if we had a situation that a person really went out of their way to help or fill a manager position or whatever, we had these spot bonuses. So this spot bonus was determined by the CEO, obviously in consultation with the appropriate members of management. But is a spot bonus type of a situation just not permissible in a municipality?
Well, it could be, Bill. So it isn't something that we have used. We have some provisions in the bylaw that I think we could look at using for some of this stuff. We have a provision that allows to adopt policies for incentives and rewards. And also there's the other special pays that the town manager can grant things that are consistent with the municipal marketplace. So for example, if it's standard that there's a shift differential or $1, difference for working out a grade, that could be adopted without a bylaw change. The bonus situations could be looked at under that other section of the bylaw, but we haven't to date. So that's some of the reasons why I didn't know if we wanted, to maybe leave this particular section primarily intact and then look at it and if we might be able to make some meaningful changes during the year, even without a bylaw change. But I'm open to any of it. It was just that was the thought process at the time.
So when we move forward with the dashboard and getting more information, it would be really helpful to see how many cases of that happen during a year, and then we could really get down to it. But I think it goes back, Bill, to what you said earlier too. How do employees look at it? So if they have a chance to comment, are they going to stand up and say, "Wait a minute, this 15-day thing has been driving us nuts for a year"? We don't know. So
well, what I guess I'm going to suggest that we let Amy and Kelly, consult with the town manager as to whether or not what her thoughts are on the reduction or change in the 15 days. That obviously can come back to us at the next meeting, and we can, I think, determine at that time what we want or don't want to do. So we should go on to sick leave accrual.
Okay. So this is a case where I'm looking ahead to that we have some pretty complicated accrual rules, things that kind of have led us to prorate by the month to the day, to things that aren't necessarily unusual, but maybe in some cases are and are pretty nitpicky for employees, and often have them feeling, well, I won't because I won't label how they're feeling, but anyway, it just doesn't feel good in general to say, well, you only have 1.3 hours, that sort of thing. And so we really want to be able to look at our leave accrual policies, and even if we're not at a point of changing the amount that's earned in a year, we think it makes sense for, sure, in the current structure to have town meeting putting forth what the limits are, but use language that allows policies to be adopted and flexible for the accrual so that we can do something that's more responsive to the current workforce needs. And so, for example, I mean, we did at some point, I guess it was 2001, we said, people need sick leave from the moment they walk in the door. So we gave them 3 days up front, but then they don't get any more till later. Those are the sorts of details that we're thinking should be in a policy. And so if it's that, ultimately through this process, it's decided that people get a week up front, or, that sort of thing, that they could get it, or they could get credited with a day on the first of every month. But we just wanted to provide more flexibility to make administration easier. It'll make it easier to put rules into software. Some of the things we've tried to do there have been difficult with some of our rules. So we're trying to set it up for improvement in the future. So this is, again, just saying that regular employees include up to 12 days in a year, and sick leave for part-time is prorated. We're keeping the provision that there's no maximum on the sick leave that can be accumulated. That's what the current language is. And then town manager shall adopt policies to provide further definition of the accrual of sick leave.
Has there ever been, and I don't obviously know what other municipalities are doing, but the PTO approach concept, is that, do you find that paid time off, PTO, is that at all present in the municipal arena?
I haven't seen a lot of it. It's a difficult system to switch to. There are some types of operations. I think it could work very well for some of our operations, like our office operations, things like that. Some of the issues that come up are because of the essential nature of some of our positions. So for example, we've had to put limits on what types of ways people could be used, say like the highway department, if they had, it's hard to describe, but I guess if certain types of leave require certain amount of notice and can be scheduled in different ways and get priority on who gets first, because they have to make sure they're staffed and they have enough people to plow the roads or clean the streets or whatever. So some types of leave, they need to say, well, this number of people can be out at any given time, or you have to put your request in by this date, or vacation period can't be used during the winter snow period, or only one person can go. And there's just a number of rules, and it relates to the type of position, because we certainly wouldn't say that for sick leave, right? I mean, if somebody's sick, whether they're eligible for on-call depends on, to be called in, depends on what type of leave they're on. So I'm not saying that it couldn't be done, but it does add complications, again, because of the way that it has historically been used in some types of our operations.
Is there any issue financially on the, I guess on the balance sheet as respect to the value of accrued sick time? Because that sick time gets paid, I assume, whatever the person's balance is at the time of termination or time of retirement or whatever. They get the, Oh.
No, it's just vacation that's required to be paid.
Right.
okay.
However, it is vacation under law. It used to be that we did pay out unused sick leave, but that was phased out. And so it's people that were hired before July 1 of 92 get those payments, and otherwise they don't. This is part of, we also need to be working on our disability provisions, the backup for providing people with income if they're out. That's a big issue. And the way that municipalities had typically done that was providing it through sick leave. And that's where some of this unlimited amount comes, but we really need to be looking to couple that with a different type of disability insurance and addressing it that way. So that's yet another conversation that needs to happen. But anyway.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else have any comment?
I had a question. I know this is personal leave, but I was wondering, can employees use personal leave during their probationary period? Because I know you want to sort of you want to allow employees to use sick leave during their probationary period. I assume they can't use vacation. I probably should know this. having read
We've been removing some of those restrictions. So
Okay.
we're letting people use time that is earned,
Okay.
basically. So yeah,
Okay.
it's been
I was just
evolved.
curious.
So we'll go on to military leave. Section 16.
Yeah. So the town adopted a section of Mass General Law that allows for some paid leave for people that serve in the military, and that law has changed over time. And so we don't think that trying to quote the benefit in the policy or the bylaw is the right way to go. It's been a little bit hard to interpret. It thought that it would be better to reference the law, and there are some other laws related to military leave, paid and unpaid, so to reference it there. And then the other thing that I remember that came up years ago was that when we were and war, the select board wanted to provide some additional paid military leave. That's what a number of places were doing. And there was question about authority for doing that. Did that have to go to town meeting? Blah, blah, blah. And as I recall, they did do something, but I thought this would be a good time to just make it clear that they could do that. If we're gonna have this bylaw, it would be better not to have that question arise. So, you know, it was just trying to not get bogged down in the bylaw with some of these details.
Okay. And then the unpaid leave of absence.
So, it's interesting, again, it all goes back to what should be in the bylaw and what shouldn't. And so, this references the Family Medical Leave Act, but that's not the only law that relates to leave, and there are other types of laws. So we don't, to me, it doesn't really make sense to specifically address that here, particularly if we're not addressing the others. Further, this talks about some things related to accruals and whether you get seniority, which actually seniority isn't even in any of our non-union systems, but I think it also means service credit for things like longevity and all. But the laws have evolved, and some of them have specific things about what the impacts of protected leave could be, whether it be paid leave or unpaid leave. So again, it doesn't seem to me that the right place to address that is the bylaw. So I think saying that we'll grant unpaid leave in accordance with the laws, and that anything that's, you know, unpaid leave that's not subject to, I don't know if that's the word, a legal entitlement, may be granted at the discretion of the town manager, and then the town manager adopts policies to implement. And making note that it could impact leave, but we have to be careful because the laws, again, often dictate what impact it can have.
Okay, well, this is a lot, and thank you, Kelly and Amy, for having put this together. There's a lot here. And let me just restate this so that I make certain that I understand, and if personnel board members may already understand. So I'm the last one, but the what we've gone over tonight, these are the provisions in the bylaw that you're suggesting we incorporate into language for the warrant article for the next town meeting. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, if you felt they were ones that were appropriate to bring forward this year, we could try to do that. I think we, as you said, we need to be careful to make sure we're not doing anything that hasn't been vetted or communicated. You know, we'd have to feel like we have language that's at least close enough to address the scope of it by the time it gets printed. It doesn't mean that we can't continue to get feedback through the public hearing process and from employees between the printing and the warrant and the town meeting. But as you've seen, it's very difficult to change if you haven't reflected the scope. And, you know, it's ideal to have it as clean as we can before we get there. We don't want to waste everybody's time. So it's balancing out that those interests, whether there are things here that really would make a difference and show progress and all that are worth doing, understanding we're in a very tight timeline here.
But I'm going to assume, and you can certainly correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
that you would not have included what you did tonight if you didn't think that you were going to be capable of finishing the race, getting to the goal line. Is that a fair assumption?
It's fair, although I didn't throw COVID into my plans, but yeah, yes, I think
Okay.
that's a fair
Right.
assumption. If there were things here, if this discussion or if other comment that we get shows problems with these things, then I think we need to back off. But if this is seeming like generally there, then yes, absolutely. I think they're doable. I think there was one that you said that you suggested we not go forward with, but anyway.
So and then I'm going to also restate what we've talked about earlier, was that the only item that is not, we've not talked about, but that if we wanted to that has some significance for employees is the longevity pay. That's the one area that's not being addressed here tonight. Okay. And that we're sort of saying there are a lot of other factors that go into that one in terms of we have no data from other municipalities. We have no data from people like GovHR. So, you know, we're really not prepared, I think, to move ahead on that particular one for this town meeting. Okay, so the action item then really is that what we will meet at our next meeting, and there will be some fine tuning and some additional information that you will have gathered from the town manager. And you'll reflect on, you know, what other comments you have heard tonight. And that, so the next meeting we have, just to do a timeline,
Yeah.
is
Next Wednesday.
next Wednesday is the 14th. Okay.
2 days before the deadline.
So how then does this impact the 12/16 deadline? Amy?
Well, that's for draft warrant articles, and I have been, we're going to communicate with the moderator and others on what is coming, so because Terry Ackerman had described before too, it's not a legal deadline, it just aids in the review process and makes sure that, it gets to council, so that doesn't mean we don't want to respect people's time and to address this, but it does, I think we're making progress and people know it's coming, we've been communicating, so.
So one strategy would be to have available for the 16th, those, any article that is, we've sort of concluded makes sense, but we haven't had the employee forum. So how does,
Yeah.
so the 16th, we could have, can we actually present something if we haven't really had the forum or the meeting with the employees?
Well, it's up to you whether you do it as a meeting with employees. We could send out a written communication and invite employees to be able to come to your next personnel board meeting. So it doesn't mean that there wouldn't be opportunities or to send things in. We were actually working on a communication, and it's consistent with what I said last year, which was to invite people, to tell them about a variety of ways that they could give input and talk about it. So certainly up to you on which approach you would want to take, but allowing people to comment that way has been helpful as well.
So I'm going to restate that so I make certain that we could have the employee meeting after the 16th of December.
Yeah, I think we just have to have it before the warrant closes
And the
on
warrant-
January 4.
January 4th. Okay.
Yeah, so we could do it on the 16th. Of course, that's getting in close, right? But we could then get the input from the 16th meeting about, does it fit the bill? And then, but we would have to start communicating now, right? I don't know, Amy, that, that the only written communication is the way to go, given where we are, with the communication comments on so far, right? So does that mean that each of us then goes to different departments and fields questions, or, I mean, how would we manage that, right?
Good question. Yeah.
I'm sorry, one seems logical to me. If there is a way we wanted to present or wanted to invite folks to the next meeting, there could be an opportunity there just to hear for general feedback. I don't know if you'd considered that. That to me I just assume when we're talking about employee feedback, how do we do that? How do we, like, if we could meet maybe even a half an hour earlier and, allow there to be sort of an open, forum for employees to come to offer feedback. Certainly would need to be packaged the right way, but I don't know if we're there yet, but that would be one consideration, is to offer an opportunity for folks to either provide something in writing or to come in person to the next meeting, just to give some feedback on, maybe you could pick a couple of, strategic areas that people might want to refer to. So that was just one thought, is incorporating into your next meeting.
But then we need to make sure we provide employees with these materials prior so that they can come prepared. And can we do that? I mean, are we, at a
Yeah, the
point where we
question
feel
is-
comfortable putting this information out is what I mean.
Amy, what are your thoughts about saying, the personnel board is considering warrant articles for the next annual town meeting, and we want to hear from employees if there's something that they feel is, important for them to consider before we finalize the draft articles that will be put as placeholders.
So I'm sorry, for me as an employee, and given what we've read with all the task force report and the various things going on, that seems like the first push, right? To say, we're welcome you to come here. But I think, Kate, your point that they need to have some time to review this stuff. Look at us reviewing it. We all are coming at it so differently. And they're not sitting in these meetings all the time. I don't think that that's enough, right? So maybe start with that, welcome if they want to come, but also it shouldn't stop there, because we do have more opportunity, more time after that first draft is due. So I would suggest that we look at that a little more comprehensively in terms of a communication plan around this.
Absolutely.
The one, I don't know how you necessarily manage this, or if you could even think of managing this, but one strategy is that we've identified or we've reviewed recommendations at this point for some personnel bylaw changes. And that we're looking for feedback on these potential changes. The other approach, obviously, and I'm not sure this is how valuable it is it's an open forum. So if you had 10 employees come and they say, I need longevity pay. How helpful is that? You've heard them, and that's important to hear them. But I wonder if the personnel task force survey and report, in essence, since it's a relatively fresh document, maybe that satisfies. I'm only trying to understand the dynamics in an employee meeting and how it's managed to benefit everybody. I don't have the answer, by the way, but I think it's worthy of a little.
Maybe that's part of the conversation, is how can the personnel board, what can we do as a board, we meaning us as a team, do to make this more, to integrate the feedback of employees with the activities of the board. That's a simple question that I don't know. There's no right or wrong answer, but we're all sort of questioning that, like, what's the best strategy? Even I wonder that when we send out a memo. I'm preparing a memo with Amy about an update on the classification plan. And I'm thinking, okay, I can write this really detailed memo that shows all the great things we're doing, but if nobody reads it or they don't have a computer, so there's a bunch of different strategies we should be considering. And I'm just sort of opening up that possibility that, does it really hurt us to say, listen, as a regular standing, or at our next meeting, we're thinking about, like you framed it, we're thinking about what to put in the next warrant. And we want to hear from you. We have limited information, but if you have a suggestion or idea and you'd like to come to the meeting, you're welcome to, and this is when we'll have it. So there's a number, it's a continuing process though, Liz, to your point. I think it needs to be, and people need to feel that their feedback is welcomed and invited. And maybe that's the first step, is just sort of opening that door. But that was just my thought. But, even I, with my communications, and I work here and have a computer, it's always trying to think about, okay, who are we trying to get to? Who's our audience? What are we trying to convey? What's the best way to do that? And for some people, it's sending out the email and then it triggers a phone call to me where I can explain the process. So I feel like that's effective, but it's not going to reach everyone. But that might be something if the open forum idea doesn't sort of preclude any particular conversation, but I think you've done, then we have enough information if we needed to form something like that for your, for your consideration, based around what we did tonight and where we're going with the study. I think that there's enough for us to share with people and to say, this is what we're doing. We want to hear from you. But that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Well, I think, well, any reaction from the personnel board?
No, I don't. have it.
Well, I was gonna say that I think sorry, I didn't mean this. I didn't mean to like talk over here. I was just thinking that if we do a public forum, I just want it to be clear. I want to make sure that we're clear that right now, this is all we can do. What we're putting forward as a draft is what we can do, but we do want to address all of these other issues. It's a longer term plan. So I don't want, I guess I'm just concerned that someone comes forward and saying this is, or we hear from many employees that a particular issue is very important, but we're not going to deal with it right now. So I just want it to be clear to the employee.
Right. I think in my experience, what you have is you've got, and I think I agree with you. Okay, but you have a slide or you have a piece of paper that says the parking lot. And the parking lot has to be those subjects or topics that we're not
Right.
able to address because of various factors, but we hear you. And that is why we have this, maybe it's a better word than parking lot, but that's a pretty generic, but we record it, and if they have paper or whatever, I mean, I think that approach would satisfy our need to get feedback on what it is that we're currently looking at. But it also gives individuals and, employees in the town an opportunity to say, oh, this is, I think, what you also should be thinking about in the future. So we satisfied in some ways both objectives.
Right. I just, as far as the forum goes, I think that's a whole other project that I think would be, I look at as not being in the garage for the others. I think it would be better to have them come here where we've got this stuff. Working on it and being able to address what we're looking at. And I just feel it would be easier for us to be able to actually respond better, I think, if we were thinking.
So playing devil's advocate now. Are you comfortable? And we'd have to notify with some kind of communication with Kelly or Amy's help here, that we're inviting them to come to the 16th December meeting.
14.
The 14th, yeah.
Sorry, the 14th.
Yeah.
And, sort of outline
And it
a
would be
little bit about,
just exactly what we did tonight. We will get information prior to our meeting. Okay.
but we're not going to see, the personnel board will, the way it's sort of shaping up, we're not going to have a document or a time prior to the 14th. And how much of an issue is that? We've always tried to have advanced information, advanced material.
Right.
But right now, unless we get together at 4:45 for conversation just with the personnel board, that's the only way we're likely going to be able to see what in fact is going to be presented or available for employees to see.
Well, I'm certainly think that's a good idea to get together earlier. I don't know if everybody can do it, but because I think I would like to be a little more prepared.
Okay. So I'm sort of hearing seeing.
But I think, so we're really talking about what we just went over.
Yes,
So
but in a
then-
new revised
Right. So that if Kelly and Amy are able to focus on that, then hopefully we might even get that a little bit earlier to, yeah.
So I don't know if we need any motion here or not, but I guess we need to have something which indicates that we, the Personnel Board, would like to invite employees to the 14th of December Personnel Board meeting.
We need to have a motion. We need to have a motion in order to invite employees to our meeting.
Sorry, it's patching. Do you need to have a motion to invite employees to your meeting? No, employees are always welcome at your meetings. So you don't need a motion for that. I think what you're asking is for us to specifically notify them of the topic here and to invite them to come. Tell
Right.
them that there'll be time on the agenda for their feedback.
Okay,
Right.
Hopefully I heard you correctly. I'm sorry, it was patching.
no, that's, you've answered the question and makes good sense, so. Any other items to talk about tonight before? We've had several long meetings, so I'm sort of thinking that we should try to just make this one maybe not more than a couple hours, because we've covered a lot. We have I think, a plan for the 14th. We have assignments that were given to Amy and Kelly. We have a good understanding, I think, of what the subject matters topics are that we're considering for a warrant article. So I think we've actually taken care of quite a few items tonight.
Yeah, and it's thanks, Amy, for you working during COVID, which is just untenable. I really understand that. We really appreciate it. And Kelly, the same, picking up the slack with Amy,
Right.
you know, being very articulate despite the COVID, but still, it's a tough thing to work only over Zoom. So the only thing I would add to the final bit of conversation there about what kind of communication to provide to employees, I like Bill's idea of a parking lot as an additional thing that they could provide us, right? So if we have a written, perhaps some, paper with other parking lot ideas that, so that would mean that the warrant, the bylaw as it stands now would have to be provided, right? A link to it or something in the communication, a communication that says specifically, we're interested to hear your feedback on these recommended changes and any additional changes that you might want to flag for us for the next round. The timing is, and then explain the timing of the whole thing. So that would kind of lay it all out. What about, can I use Bill's chair position to say, what about Bill's email gets on there in case somebody can't come? So that you get some, if they can't provide feedback by in person, is there an avenue for them to supply that? I mean, we just accumulate them and then go forward, but how to best handle that? Because that's accessibility, right?
Sure.
That we want to make sure that, I mean, that one of our meetings, the meeting was set and employees who wanted to come for adjudication couldn't make it and they delayed, right? But that was quite a delay for them.
Right.
And we don't want that to happen because there's no other time really for this work, right? So what do you all think of those suggestions? Bill in particular, because I'm supporting his email being.
Well, no, I mean, I think that's, I mean, that,
They could also come to maybe somebody here with sending them off to him if he didn't want his email. But I don't think that's an issue.
Yeah, and that's always a possibility, but I think to Liz's point, though, some people may feel more comfortable perhaps going to a member of the board as opposed to staff. So maybe we could get this from a couple of different ways. I mean, we're here to support you no matter what. If Bill says no way, you're crazy for putting my name on on an email to go out. You know, it's just the offer or the opportunity to share their thoughts with you. I think that would go a long way, but
Yeah, I also think too, it's showing them transparency and communication. I think that's probably the biggest thing. About, about one of the biggest things we wanted to accomplish as a board this year, you know, going forward. Just make sure that we will listen to them. So I think this is something they may want to say to Bill instead of bringing it to either to the personnel board itself.
And I think Liz is right, that our emails are already, aren't they on,
I think they are.
Right.
No, no. So your emails are not posted. We could talk about whether there's a Concord MA box set up for the personnel chair or something like that. So it doesn't have to be your personal email if that's helpful. We can look into that. I know that is sometimes used.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're pretty easy to set up so that, Bill, you're
Yeah, yeah.
not flooded, but you have a place to go to where you can see the response.
Sure, sure.
And
I
he-
think that's a good idea.
Yeah, that sounds
I mean,
great.
the other consideration of why it should go through I'm sorry, why it should go through the town system perhaps is having to do with public records law. So there's some things, it doesn't mean that it's automatically confidential at all. So there's some more to discuss here about what it means. And I guess I would suggest, I mean, not necessarily for this one time, but I would suggest that an agenda topic for an upcoming meeting be to map out the communication plans, like what time of year would be best to hold forums? What's the schedule? Okay, we get through town meeting, we've got to implement that. When's the time to start collecting information for the next town meeting? And how do we get things in between? So it just, you know, I think there's a few options, but definitely things to consider with every single one of those, you know.
So so you're supporting that I will get some kind of access to Concord Gov and people can send me with the understanding is that it's public, it's available. Well, it's not going to necessarily be available to the public any more than the survey was, if in fact there's, you know, personal information.
Well, that's what I think it needs to be very clear before we would open something like that up about what are going to be the rules and how we communicate it. So one, I don't on my own have the ability to say, yes, there could be a Concord MA email, but it's an idea we can explore. I think if it's, if we start having things go that direction rather than through the HR department, we need to be very careful about what we tell people. Just like your suggestion that there be a policy for surveys, I think there need to be very clear parameters of what this email is all about and what would be confidential and what wouldn't.
Yeah, I think that's actually another argument for having something in writing.
I can help you with your thing, getting on IT.
Okay, well,
I'm putting Nancy down as our IT coordinator.
But I also want to take this opportunity. I think we all feel the same, that it's been nice for Amy to have Kelly. I don't know, you know, it seems like you just appeared not too long ago. I mean, you've probably been here behind the scenes, but it's nice for both of you to have each other to work with, because I think there's just been an enormous amount of work for the HR department. So
Yeah, I'm grateful to Kelly, and I'm also grateful to Stephanie, who is our sole survivor left on the Zoom. She's the assistant director, and to make some of these the shifts and where we're able to focus our attention, she's taking on a big part of what I normally do, so that I can go over to Church Street and focus on making these changes, and that's just been instrumental. There's tons of work, we can't keep up with it all, but she's really had been there to help make sure that happens. And Kelly's been great. It's been good to have, you know, a resource to help work with. And so when I do get pulled into those other matters, which I do, you know, every day there can be something that comes up. We've got Kelly steadily keeping this ship on the right direction, you know, so yeah. Thanks,
I'm,
your team, go team.
I'm glad I had the opportunity to at the select board meeting to acknowledge each of these women
Right.
in terms of
Right.
their involvement and their assistance. And it's been, obviously, it is a team kind of an effort, no doubt about it. So I guess.
Bill,
is
can I
there-
just say thank you, Bill? I noticed, I watched the recording this morning and just really appreciated that you thanked me for doing the minutes. That was so nice of you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So if there is any public comments, that this is the time that we'll entertain them.
Well, it's only staff that's left. Everybody else left
You
the
know,
meeting.
I hate it when we start with 500 town citizens and then it dwindles down to. Oh,
Yeah.
there's got to be a way to keep people's interest. So anyway,
Can I just ask you, well, two things, sorry. So this is my public comment. One, if there's anything that any of you think about in terms of suggested edits for the materials that we said, you don't have to wait till the next meeting. You can't communicate it all with each other, but please send feedback back to me and Kelly by email. We can use that. It does end up going into a next document that we'd report to the meetings, but there's not a reason to wait. So I'd encourage you to do that if there's something that will help us move along in the town timeline. And number two, the item that we didn't get to on the agenda, which was a very big table that I put into the to the packet, is I've been working on looking at the role of the board and trying to help set everybody up to look at the charge. So that wasn't your, again, that's the basis of all the kind of decisions about where do you go from here. And so I won't go into it all now. I encourage you to take a look at it, but left-hand side is direct quotes from the 1985 document. Middle excerpts, direct quotes from the bylaw. And then I don't have it in front of me, but just other things that we need to think about, things that should either be changed or something about that. So there's been a lot of confusion about whether the charge is still valid, what the rule is and all that. And I think this is the first step in being able to evaluate that and move forward. Or I hope that's helpful to you. Happy to look at other forms, but that would be something to look at going forward, I would think.
okay. So I think we're set to adjourn.
Good. I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Thank you, Nancy.
7:22.
7:22. Oh. Good second.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. And next meeting, I think Joe Emmerich will be here. So we're going to give, he'll be the newbie. So we'll give him all of the work to do.
Getting promoted. I'm sorry, you're getting last one.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Feel better.
Thank you. Thank you.